Welcome to Calvary Conversations. My name is Tim Hange, an English and Education faculty member at Calvary University. It's my pleasure today to interview Scott Edgar and to talk with him about the challenges that are facing Christian leaders today. Let me begin by giving you a bit of an introduction for Scott. It's quite lengthy. Scott's had a wide range of experience. I'm so excited to have you here today, Scott, by the way. Scott and his wife, Rebecca, are graduates of Calvary University. Back in the 80s, you both graduated, if I'm correct, right?
Yes.
Yep, you've served together in pastoral ministry in 4 different churches and as missionaries in the former Soviet Union in what's now Ukraine. Is that correct?
Yes.
So, yep. Scott has almost 20 years of experience in Christian higher education, serving as a faculty member, academic dean, and associate dean. He's also served as the vice president of a missions organization, and currently Scott serves on the as a faculty member of several Christian universities and seminaries, most notably Liberty University, where he teaches and mentors students in the Doctor of Ministry program, and teaches in the Graduate School of Pastoral Care and Counseling, in the counseling in their life and leadership coaching program. Is that correct?
Yes, it is. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So 3 years ago, Scott founded Pathways to Success Executive Coaching. And I actually have had a chance to see Scott in action as I was a member of one of his coaching groups. It's a ministry that's focused on helping Christians discover and pursue their unique paths to success. Based on Scott's experience, the ministry focuses on individuals serving in vocational Christian ministry. Scott and his wife, Rebecca, live in Bentonville, Arkansas, and are actively involved in Fellowship Bible Church of Northwest Arkansas. Scott, your degrees are quite impressive. You began, of course, with the most impressive degree you could possibly attain, which was a bachelor's in biblical studies at Calvary University.
You bet. Yeah.
Then, of course,
really the highlight and really the foundational education for our life in ministry. And no matter where I've gone since then, I look at Calvary as being that foundation of life and ministry that has served us well.
Yep. And then you went on to get your MDiv from in Christian thought from Trinity Evangelical Divinity School, a DMin from Fuller Theological Seminary, a PhD from the University of Wales. And did you do that remotely, or were you able to actually be present there?
No, I was actually a missionary in Ukraine at the time, and I started that program. I would spend a number of weeks each year on campus. So it was, I guess you'd call it distance education with a month each year with working with faculty.
Wow, that's amazing. So, and you have a graduate certificate in executive coaching from the Townsend Institute at Concordia University in Irvine, California. And that's Townsend, of course, the famous Christian, I guess you'd say, counselor. Right. So, married for 35 years, interested in personal growth and health of Christian leaders, trout fishing, and Kansas City barbecue. That is an amazing introduction. Wow. So, Scott, let's begin with this first question. You went from a ministry-related path ultimately into the world of academia. Although your missionary work really wasn't, was it church planning or was it more academic? It was more
It was
teaching,
more
right?
academic. There was a time, Tim, where I would have to say my wife and I were surprised by God. We've been serving in local church ministry in different roles. Christian education pastor, pastor of adult ministries, executive pastor, interim pastor. And in 1998, our church made the mistake of sending us on a short-term missions trip.
I love it.
And we spent a few weeks in Ukraine, and things were just opening up, and they were able to start a network of Bible colleges. And so we went there, and I taught at a Bible college near Moldova, also one near the Russian border. And we taught all day long from like 8:30 in the morning till 6 at night. And the impact on us was so powerful. I remember very clearly a dean of one of the schools, the one near Moldova, and he broke down in tears and he said, "Thank you so much for coming here and sharing with our students." and they
Wow.
were just there taking notes. This is the first time I've ever had the chance to sit under biblical teaching in an intense
Mhm.
way. And I remember I'm not really the crying type, but I broke down and said, "No, thank you for being a blessing to us," because we
Wow.
experienced the love, the hunger for the word they had. We returned to our church in Wichita, Kansas.
Hmm.
And at the time, we just thought, well, that was a wonderful experience, but we've been called to local church. But
Right.
with the next few months, the Lord made it very clear to myself and to my wife that He wanted us to leave local church ministry, raise support, and move to Ukraine to serve in the Bible college theological education world.
And you were there 3 years?
Yeah, 3 years there, and then
3 years.
another year doing, fundraising and missionary promotion stateside, but, that
Gotcha.
was our transition out of
Yeah.
local church into some type of equipping ministry, and then when the Lord brought us home, that was kinda our transition into Christian higher education.
What was that transition back like?
That's a very good question, Tim. Of course, we have a connection because you served in that part of the world.
Yes.
And to be honest, it was a little challenging coming from a place in the world where people were hungry,
Hmm.
people had suffered for the gospel.
Yeah.
People took every opportunity to learn biblical truth, and they were taking what we gave them and just immediately just multiplying that into ministry.
Wow.
And so it was a little hard coming back, and I had a chance to being at a
Mm.
Christian college and seminary. But compared to what we had experienced, we had a hard time coming back to, sometimes the local church that was kind of ho hum and kind of had lost its fervor. But that was a change that I've stayed with, and I believe in equipping people for ministry with a gospel focus, and
Hmm.
that's what drives me today.
Uh, how, before we get to the coaching, I did just want to point out: do you think that, or ask this question because I bet this played. Do you think that your adjustment back into life here played into your decision to pursue coaching?
Definitely, Tim. In a funny way, returning from the former Soviet Union to the States was a more difficult transition
Hmm.
than our transition to go there.
Yeah.
And like a lot of missionaries, we came back and we had the same 30, 45 minute, we call it exit interview before we
Right.
returned to life in the States. And we really struggled. I hit a wall and a little bit of depression and
Hmm.
all the things that go with that. And that experience and experiences earlier in my ministry where I had served at a church that ended up splitting, and I was asked to resign.
Mm.
I struggled with depression and examined my calling. And what I've learned is people in different types of Christian work don't have a place to go to debrief,
Yeah.
grieve, share their hurt, process. And that theme in my life of, in some ways, being wounded in ministry was probably the motivation that has brought me to where I'm at, where I have the experience in a variety of ministries, but I also have the experience of walking through some very dark times.
I just want to really point out for our listenership, this is one of the things that really has attracted me to Scott. Is Scott, you just said a couple of things that a lot of people would hesitate to share publicly. Just the fact that you went through a very difficult adjustment coming back to the States. You've been through part of a church split and a forced resignation, but it's our ability, not to speak about these things. I think in your ability to speak about these things openly, that I think equips you uh, really to coach Christian leaders. We really can't afford, I think, as Christian leaders, we need to be iron sharpening iron, and you really can't do that if there's an ethos of pretentiousness. Um, so yeah, I really appreciate that about you.
Thanks.
I have some questions about your life in academia, but I actually want to jump to the question about your personal coaching. Um, what are the biggest needs that you see right now, or the biggest challenges? Let's take it that way.
Mhm.
The biggest challenges that you are seeing facing Christians in leadership today. What would you say those are?
Well, that's a complicated question, but in some ways a straightforward one, Tim. The challenges are great. We live in a time where our society is definitely becoming post-Christian and
Hmm.
antagonistic. We live, and we're seeing it in recent years. Things are volatile, things are chaotic, things are changing and changing very quickly. And so, uh, being a leader and trying to provide direction to God's people when things are very uncertain and unpredictable, that is just an emotionally draining task.
Hmm.
So you have that challenge, but also people in Christian ministry tend to overemphasize the spiritual, and that we tend to underestimate the importance of us as human servants and instruments of God. And so sometimes we don't apply our own medicine. We work harder, we pray
Hmm.
harder, but we tend to not take care of ourselves as persons, our emotional health, our psychological health, our physical health. And over time, what I see is Christian leaders serve with an injured soul. And what I mean is you're very cautious. You're very afraid of saying things because people have their opinions. And so
Hmm.
we uh, intellectually, the way we lead, we become more guarded, more protective in what we say and do. And also, let's face it, it's draining and
Yeah.
it's hard to lead. And I don't know what it is, but Christian leaders, maybe we think it's a sign of weakness that we need other people to help us be healthy, to grow. In many ways, we're spiritual first responders. And
Mm.
we know that today that people who are nurses or first responders themselves need care. But in ministry, we see people crash and burn. We see casualties. It's a spiritual warfare, and yet we don't have a place to unpack that. And so we keep taking these burdens upon ourselves. And over time, it just keeps us from being authentic, being real. We don't want somebody to think that, like I said, we're discouraged, we're depressed. I mean, where's the faith in that, right? All the things that
Right.
we tell ourselves. So uh, we just have a lot of challenges. We have the challenge of leadership.
Hmm.
Sometimes we have the responsibility of leadership, but on a human level, we don't have a lot of authority.
Right.
And that makes it challenging. But also, we're very guarded, and we don't want people to think that we don't have it all together. And people put us on a pedestal. I know that. We just need to be careful that we don't accept that false view and allow ourselves to be on the pedestal.
As you're talking, like I'm trying to, I'm sitting here trying to think how leaders, how we've gotten to the point where we put leaders in these incredibly difficult positions, but we don't think about the sort of emotional support they're going to need to get through it.
Mhm.
And I wonder if part of that is cultural. I mean, we Americans are very independent in our thinking. There's also that cultural aspect that you mentioned just now of like, I don't want anybody to think that I can't handle it. I'm not doing my
Mhm.
job, right? And so there's this level of appropriateness to that, it sort of ties, and I really like what you said, but I kind of want to clarify that. Focus so much on the spiritual that they forget the human, but really, aren't the spiritual and human connected to begin with? I mean, doesn't this stem from a false view, perhaps, of what is spiritual to begin with?
Oh yeah, we take the theological heresies of only seeing the divinity of Christ, neglect the humanity of Christ, and in some ways, when it comes to our spiritual growth and our own development, we focus on the spiritual, and yet we fail to see that we're also human and we have soulish
Hmm.
components that need to be healthy.
Yeah. Yeah. What if so if you're a pastor or a leader or a missionary and you don't feel like you have somebody that you don't feel like there's a system in place to support you, what do you think would be some key pieces of advice you would give somebody in that position in terms of managing their own emotional and spiritual growth and health?
Excellent question, and again, that's sometimes the isolation that we put ourselves in as Christian leaders. We sometimes we can't trust people around us because sometimes they're part of the problem, right? And
Hmm.
if you're like me and you've been in ministry for any period of time, you've been betrayed.
Hmm.
You've had people turn on you, and so and there's probably a healthy distance that we need to have between ourselves and the people we lead. I'd encourage people in ministry, no matter if you're in missions, pastoral ministry, Christian higher ed, whatever it is, to find a group of people that you feel comfortable with to
Hmm.
be your life team. I have a group of several people that I could be real with, that if my ideas are funny or off the wall, they'll tell me. And sometimes they'll be there to listen, to encourage. And so if you can't use that in your own network or congregation or organization, well, find a group of people that you can be real with and process. And of course, having been the beneficiary of coaching, because that's what I did a number of years ago when I went to the Townsend Institute in California, where we, in the course of a week, processed my life and brought a lot of these things up. Uh, and I continued to receive coaching. I just think it's a valuable thing for a leader to have someone to guide them in processing, planning, growth in different areas of life.
Hmm.
And we need to be stewards of who we are and the calling that God has given us.
Right.
And we need to take seriously investing and at least maintaining what God has given us. And I'm a believer in coaching, as you could tell, Tim. So,
Yeah. Yeah. What You know, sometimes people go to coaching that they feel like is not incredibly effective for them.
mhm.
And I've been in that situation too. I've been in a room with somebody who, I'm seeking counsel and it's just not working. I don't feel like perhaps they are understanding the issues or so I kind of want to get at I've experienced your coaching and I both individually and as part of a group. And as long as everybody's being honest here, it
Mhm.
really helped me with a transition back from Russia. I'd spent 8 years there, and it was really quite a difficult transition back, as you recall. But the question is, what makes an effective coach? I mean, I, as people with a heart of ministry, of course, we'd love people to connect with you, but if not you, someone, right? What should they
Right.
be looking for in terms of a ministry coach? If you're a pastor or a missionary or somebody who who needs that connection.
Yeah. Well, excellent question. First of all, coaching in the corporate world is very common.
Hmm.
Most people, and I live in the world in Bentonville, Arkansas, of Walmart and Sam's Club and Tyson and a lot of executives. Coaching is often a perk of being in leadership. because they know that everybody needs to grow.
Right.
And for the price of a good seminar or conference, you could receive coaching. It's more regular, it's focused, it's sequential. It's more focusing on areas that you need growth on or building on strengths. But there's three basic categories of coaching. There are people who give you a lot of assessments,
Mm-hmm.
and we've done those, DISC, and there's a place for that. But they will then give you the results of those and send you on your way, and they say that's coaching.
Right.
There's coaches that kind of pepper you with an endless series of open-ended questions. What
Mm-hmm.
kind of pastor do you want to be when you grow up? Those type of things. And what I experienced at the Townsend Institute was a blend of theology,
Mm-hmm.
psychology, leadership theory, neuroscience, and it's holistic. And as we realize, sometimes what we don't need is more information.
Right.
We need to grow and develop the capacities to connect with people and have healthy relationships. We
Yep.
need the capacity to have healthy boundaries
Yep.
and to be our own individuals and not uh, just carrying out the dictates of our followers or those we lead. We need the capacity to integrate our negative experiences in life. And
Yep.
I think that's incredible for people in ministry because we've all had those, right? And we
Right.
tend to just stuff them down and don't deal with those. And then finally, we need help just becoming more assertive and growing in uh, this discovering what our voice is as a Christian leader and develop the capacity to discern God's leading and voice as well. And
Yeah.
so the type of coaching I've experienced is a one where there's sequential exercises to grow in all these aspects of just being a healthy person,
Right.
in addition to being a believer and a leader. And sometimes we overlook that. So my recommendation is something that has a holistic
You know,
focus.
I think that word, I think some Christians in my circle are turned off by that word because that word is often used in sort of secular
Mhm.
psychological context, et cetera. But I really don't think it's a word that we as Christians should fear, because when we talk about holistic, what we mean is that there's a spirit, a mind, a body. The Bible clearly teaches
Mhm.
these things, right? And that we need to understand that the spiritual applies to our entire life. Not There's not some division between secular and sacred, where the church things I do at church are church things, and what I experience privately or whatever pain I'm experiencing, or my fatigue and all of that, that's a physical thing. No, they're all connected, and I really like the fact that you're not afraid to go there, even with that word.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, we
now,
tend to think holistic focus, it means watering down the spiritual.
right.
And to me, it's we're put together in a wonderful way, and all these things relate, just like the hand and all our fingers that's connected. And if you look at the pastorals and Paul's advice to Titus and Timothy about the qualifications for leadership, those are not always about how much theology you know or those type of things, but there are descriptions there to talk about how you relate to others.
Yep.
How do you deal with your emotional impulses and prone to anger
Hmm.
and managing your family, and so I tend to look at spiritual, just like your hand here is having intellectual, emotional, relational, all these different components. And so I think we've been reductionistic in how we look at the spiritual part of leadership.
Yeah. You know, I'm going to admit that I had a whole second line of questioning that dealt with Christians in academia, but I think I'm going to press your goodwill for a second interview, because I would like to take the last minutes that we have of this interview and ask a really important question that wasn't on the list I gave you either. So this may surprise you a little bit, but we have a lot of young people at Calvary who are excited to train for ministry. I mean, they are where you were back in the 80s, a young person wanting to get out there and serve the Lord and be part of God's kingdom work here on earth. And yet, undeniably, we see so many succumb to discouragement, so many who are doing other things 5-10 years later, etc. If you could give any advice to a young person who is at Calvary University right now or anywhere studying for ministry, preparing for ministry, what would it be in order to stay healthy, in order to persevere and to stay in the course as you've been able to do these past 30 plus years?
Well, excellent question. Tim, I guess first of all, focus on developing yourself as a person,
Hmm.
not just your biblical knowledge or your skills in teaching, but grow yourself as a person. And if there's baggage in your life, if there's hurt in your life, find some way either through counseling. I believe that there are needs that you need to go to a certified counselor or a therapist to address.
Hmm.
And if you don't, the stresses of ministry will bring those things to the surface in more intense ways. If you're under uh, the microscope of being a pastor or a missionary, or you're alone in another part of the world and the stress comes, those areas of your life are going to come to light, and they're going to bubble over. And so focus on growing yourself as a person.
Hmm.
Also, if you have a chance to, I would say, do internships, be an associate pastor, learn to grow without the pressures prematurely of being
That is
the person.
such good advice. Hmm.
Because I've seen too many times where your young leaders are in a situation and the pressure is so severe, and unfortunately the hurt is so great. Uh, they weren't mature enough or strong enough to handle it. And sometimes, like me early in ministry, you really consider, well, maybe I'm not equipped for this. Maybe I misunderstood the call. Maybe I need to find something else. And so, look at yourself in as a person that needs to grow holistically, and not just how much Bible do you know, can you preach, can you teach, and so on.
One last question to that angle too. What happens to that young person when they step into a ministry position and they find that the very things that they expected a church to be, the high expectations, they find the ugliness of the human sinful nature there, and it turns on them, as in, being asked to leave, or, maybe a over controlling board, or whatever it may be that discourages people. And I so often hear young people say, well, I had no idea people in the church would behave this way, or people in ministry would behave this way. How does one get over get through that, get through dealing with the sinfulness of man in ministry without abandoning ministry and still maintain focus and hope?
You know, you know, that's the dark side of ministry, isn't it?
Hmm.
Uh, and I've been there where you go into ministry and you have a noble calling, lofty expectations. I'm here to, preach the word, all those things, but we're all human,
Hmm.
and uh, and sin emerges, and even in the midst of a Christian organization or church, we have mixed motives of, even if we're in the Lord's work, of maybe some part of us that wants to be successful or
Hmm.
wants people to like us. And I guess I would advise that person, if you're there now, to, you know, uh, look with a little bit of grace on the people that you're with, and don't look at them as all the bad guys and you're the good person, but just realize that we're all saved by grace and we're called to serve, and working with sinners is messy,
Mm-hmm.
and we're messy.
Yep. Well, Scott, I thank you so much for taking the time today, and I really hope that you will join us for part 2, where we can talk about Christianity in academia and really academic missions too. I think some people don't consider that when they think of the mission field. They think of church planning, and so maybe just plugging a little bit of this for our listeners. We'd love to have you back and kind of discuss the importance of academics in ministry and spiritual life in academics. But thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks,
Your experience and wisdom is invaluable. And thank you all for listening to Calvary Conversations. Have a great day. Bye.
Thank you for joining us for this edition of Calvary Conversations, a service of Calvary University in Kansas City, Missouri. We invite you to participate in the conversation by contacting us through the Calvary University website, calvary.edu, or by calling us at 816-322-0110. Join us again next week for another Calvary Conversation.